My name is Lila Monroe, and I built a sustainable fashion label in Portland, Oregon, long before betrayal taught me that love and loyalty don't always share the same roof. At 32, I thought I had everything worth keeping: a thriving business, a kind husband, and a family that, though fractured, I still tried to hold together. I even let them live in the house my late mother left me. I believed it would bring us closer. I was wrong. Everything unraveled the day I learned the two people I trusted most, my husband and my half-sister, had been lying to me. They hadn't just broken my heart. They'd built an entire plan to steal the company and the home that carried my mother's legacy. When I first took the stand in court, the room felt colder than winter glass. My half-sister, Bianca Walsh, sat next to my husband, Evan Brooks, their hands clasped as though I were the stranger who'd wronged them. Behind them, my father and stepmother watched with smug detachment, as if I owed them something for years of neglect. "The court will side with us," Bianca said that day, her voice sweet as poison. "She's just bitter and alone." Alone, that word echoed like a bell inside me. They thought they could shame me into silence, bury the truth beneath their performance of innocence. But I wasn't the same girl who once begged them to see me. I smiled, steady and quiet. "I don't need to prove my innocence," I said. "I just need to show the world your guilt." And I did. But before we reached that moment, before the truth tore through every lie they'd built, let me tell you where it began. I grew up on the outskirts of Portland, in a cedar-shaded house my mother filled with sketches, fabric scraps, and the scent of lavender soap. Her name was Lila Monroe, a designer who taught me that beauty came from creation, not perfection. She died when I was 9, leaving behind a handful of sketches and a locket I still wear to this day. My father, Richard Monroe, remarried quickly. Her name was Camilla, a woman who smelled of perfume and judgment. And soon after came their daughter, Bianca, small, bright-eyed, and already the center of their world. Camilla adored Bianca. My father followed her lead. By the time I was 12, I had become a ghost in my own home, the babysitter, the scapegoat, the forgotten child. Whenever Bianca cried, I was blamed. Whenever something broke, it was somehow my fault. "You're the older sister," Camilla would snap, "start acting like it." My father would nod silently, too cowardly to speak but quick enough to agree. I learned early that silence was the currency in that house, and I spent it often. When I was 16, Bianca destroyed the one thing I couldn't replace, a soft blue dress my mother had designed, every stitch a piece of her soul. I found it crumpled on my floor, ripped at the seams, Bianca's laughter echoing from the hallway. "It's just a dress," she said, rolling her eyes. But it wasn't just a dress. It was all I had left of my mother. When I showed Camilla, hoping for sympathy, her face hardened. "Why didn't you keep it safe?" she snapped. That night, I sat in my room without dinner, clutching the ruined fabric, tears burning my cheeks. For the first time, I saw it clearly: their cruelty wasn't carelessness. It was deliberate. Camilla's eyes always lingered on my mother's things. The sketches, the furniture, the house itself. Even then, I saw the quiet envy behind her politeness. I didn't yet understand why. But I would. By the time I turned 18, I'd stopped seeking their approval. I worked after school at a boutique downtown, saving every dollar. I was determined to leave that house, to build a life untouched by Camilla's whispers or Bianca's smirk. And then, one spring morning, everything changed. A letter arrived, sealed in a lawyer's envelope, my mother's name embossed in faded ink. Evelyn Monroe's will. It left the house entirely to me. Camilla's smile cracked that day, though she tried to hide it. My father stayed silent, but I saw the tension in his jaw. "You'll let us stay, won't you?" Camilla asked sweetly, her hand resting on my arm. And I did. Against every instinct, I let them stay, my father, Camilla, and Bianca. I told myself it was for family. I told myself it was what my mother would have wanted. But I was wrong. Because the house my mother left me didn't bring us closer. It became the first battlefield. I didn't know it then, but that house, the one filled with my mother's light, would soon become the stage for every betrayal that followed. And the moment I trusted them to stay was the moment I began losing everything. The morning sun in Portland has a way of fooling you, soft, golden, almost kind. But beneath that glow, cracks can hide. For years, I mistook warmth for safety, especially inside that house. After inheriting my mother's home, I thought letting my father and Camilla stay would heal the old wounds. Maybe we'd find something like family again. But the truth? I was just keeping my enemies close, I just didn't know it yet. Bianca grew up spoiled, the kind of woman who floated through rooms expecting the world to orbit her. She treated the house like a hotel and me like the maid. My father looked away, Camilla smiled through every slight. But I stayed quiet, focused on what mattered, building a dream. The sketches my mother left behind became my blueprint. Dresses with clean lines, honest fabrics, beauty that breathed. I wanted to finish what she started. I worked at a local design shop downtown, learning everything: how to cut patterns, talk to suppliers, even how to sell to picky clients who cared more about price than purpose. That's where I met Jade Foster, my mother's old friend, a designer who'd once been her business partner. Her silver hair was always tied up in a messy knot, her hands forever dusted with chalk from sketching. "You've got Evelyn's touch," she told me, flipping through my early designs. "But your vision? That's all you, Lila." Her encouragement was the spark I needed. I enrolled in design classes at night, juggled shifts at the shop, and poured every dollar I made into supplies. My dream had a name, Monroe Atelier, a tribute to my mother's artistry and the independence I fought to claim. Camilla called it a hobby. My father said I was neglecting family. What they meant was I wasn't serving them anymore. Still, I worked through the noise, long nights, coffee-stained sketches, aching hands. And slowly, the pieces came together. One local market changed everything. I set up a small stall with a handful of sustainable dresses, each stitched with organic cotton and hope. By the end of the day, I had sold out. The whispers started then. "She's onto something," Jade said, smiling as she counted the day's earnings. But Camilla only scoffed. "A few dresses don't make a business," she sneered. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. Because beneath her words, I saw it: fear. For the first time, I wasn't under their control. Months passed, and Monroe Atelier took shape. I rented a tiny studio downtown, painted the walls white, and filled them with my mother's sketches. Jade introduced me to suppliers who cared about the planet as much as I did. Every design told a story of healing, legacy, and strength. Still, I couldn't ignore the growing distance at home. Bianca had become restless. She'd drift through the house, scrolling through her phone, asking about my sales with a sugary smile. "Maybe you could hire me someday," she joked one night. I laughed politely, though something in her tone made my stomach twist. Because Bianca didn't joke. Not really. Then came Evan Brooks. He showed up at a small business fair where I was presenting Monroe Atelier's sustainable mission. Clean-cut, soft-spoken, with a knack for numbers that put me at ease. He asked intelligent questions, stayed after the talk, and we ended up sharing coffee under a string of lights outside the venue. He was different, or so I believed. We dated for a year before he proposed during a walk through the city's rose gardens. It felt like something out of a movie, tender, simple, full of promise. Against the backdrop of every betrayal I'd known, his love seemed genuine. And so, I said yes. Our wedding was small, held in a quiet park under the red maples. My father attended out of obligation, Camilla dressed like she was at her own coronation, and Bianca cried as though she'd lost something precious. I thought it was happiness. It wasn't. Evan joined Monroe Atelier soon after, handling finances as our operations grew. You can trust me with this, he'd teased, signing the paperwork that made him CFO. His charm, his ease, they blinded me to the warning signs. Under his guidance, profits soared. We streamlined production, partnered with new suppliers, and built an online store that turned heads across Oregon. It felt like everything I'd dreamed of was finally real. But what I didn't see were the late nights Evan spent in his office, or the way Bianca's visits to the studio became more frequent. She's helping me with marketing, he said once, his tone light. I wanted to believe him. Yet, sometimes when I walked in, they'd fall silent, eyes darting, laughter dying too quickly. Jade noticed before I did. You trust easily, she said one afternoon, her tone gentle but firm. I smiled it off, hiding the unease that had started to stir. Because what do you do when the people you love most start looking at each other the way they used to look at you? I told myself I was imagining things, that after years of family drama, I was paranoid. But deep down, a small voice whispered otherwise. And soon, I'd have proof. It started with a single number that didn't add up, one missing payment buried in our company books. I almost ignored it. I wish I had. Because that single number was the thread that would unravel everything I'd built, and expose the betrayal I never saw coming. Numbers don't lie, people do. That's what Jade once told me when we were balancing Monroe Atelier's early accounts. Back then, I laughed it off. Now, I wish I'd listened more closely. It started one rainy Tuesday night. The kind of Portland rain that hums against the windows, soft but relentless, the sound of something slowly eroding. I stayed late at the studio, reviewing expense reports that Evan usually handled. He'd been staying out more often, blaming supplier meetings and late audits. I told myself he was just busy. But then, I saw it, a series of payments labeled consulting fees, BW Collective. They weren't large, just small enough to go unnoticed. But there were too many of them, recurring like clockwork. BW Collective. I didn't recognize the name, but something about those initials, BW, made my chest tighten. I printed the page and stared at it until the letters blurred. Then I called Tessa, our in-house accountant, a detail-oriented woman who rarely missed a decimal. Tessa, I said quietly, do you know anything about these? She scanned the document and frowned. Those approvals came from Evan's login, she said. He marked them as vendor outreach. My stomach sank. Vendor outreach wasn't his department. It was mine. That night, I drove home in silence, the rain blurring the city lights like a watercolor of confusion. When I walked in, Evan was sitting on the couch, scrolling his phone, smiling faintly. Bianca was there too, curled on the armrest, laughing at something he'd just said. The sight hit me like a slap. Didn't know you were home so early, Evan said, his tone too casual. Neither did I replied, my voice low. Bianca stood, brushing invisible lint from her dress. I was just dropping off some marketing ideas, she said sweetly. Her perfume, the same one Camilla used to wear, filled the room. I didn't argue. I didn't ask. I just went upstairs, printed report clenched in my fist, heart thundering. But I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. The next day, I called Derek, our IT specialist, loyal, quiet, the kind of man who understood confidentiality like religion. Can you trace the transactions linked to BW Collective? I asked. He looked puzzled but nodded. Sure. Give me a day or two. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the house, every vibration from Evan's phone, set my nerves on fire. When he reached for me in bed, I pretended to sleep. By Friday, Derek called me into his small office. His face was pale. "You might want to sit down," he said. He handed me a folder, pages of emails printed in neat rows. The subject lines were unmistakable. From Evan Brooks to Bianca Walsh. My name appeared in those threads, not as a person, but as a target. "We'll take her market share. She's too busy chasing image to notice. Once we launch BW Collective, she'll be out of the picture." My vision blurred. My pulse roared in my ears. Evan. My husband. Bianca. My sister. They'd been siphoning company funds, slowly feeding them into an account under BW Collective, their new brand. My brand's designs, my materials, my resources, all stolen under my nose. But the betrayal went beyond business. As I read further, the tone of the messages changed. They weren't just partners. They were lovers. "Hotel by the river, 10 p.m. Don't be late. She suspects nothing. Yet." My breath hitched. My hands trembled so hard the papers slipped from my grip. The sound echoed in Derek's office, a soft flutter of betrayal. "I'm sorry, Lila," Derek said quietly. "There's more." He handed me another page, emails between Bianca and Camilla. My stepmother had been in on it too, encouraging Bianca to secure the house once I cracked. "The Monroe place belongs in our family," she'd written. I pressed a hand to my mouth, nausea rising. It wasn't just an affair. It was a coordinated theft of my business, my legacy, my mother's home. That evening, I drove to the house. The lights were on. Camilla opened the door with her practiced smile. "Lila," she said warmly, "you look pale. Long day?" Behind her, Bianca lounged on the couch, scrolling her phone. My father sat silently in the corner, eyes down, pretending not to see me. For a long moment, I said nothing. The warmth of the house, once comforting, felt suffocating. Then I finally spoke. "Evan and Bianca," I said evenly, "are stealing from me. From Monroe Atelier." Camilla's expression didn't flicker. "You must be mistaken," she said softly. "They wouldn't do that." I stared at her, realizing she already knew. When I left that night, I didn't cry. Not yet. I just drove aimlessly until I reached the edge of the city, where the forest met the water. I parked, turned off the lights, and let the truth settle like dust. The people I had built my world around had built theirs on top of my trust, and they thought I'd never notice. They were wrong. Because now, I had proof. The next morning, I locked those emails in my desk drawer and called my lawyer. "I need to protect what's mine," I said. But I had no idea just how dirty they'd play once I started fighting back, or how far they'd go to destroy me before I could expose them. When people have nothing left to lose, they tell the truth. When they have everything to lose, they lie. And my family? They lied like it was an art form. By the time I confronted the reality of Evan and Bianca's betrayal, it was too late for denial. I'd already lost the version of myself who believed love could fix people. What came next wasn't heartbreak. It was war. The morning after discovering the emails, I met Heidi Lane, the lawyer who'd handled my mother's estate years ago. Her office overlooked the rainy Portland skyline, all glass, steel, and quiet determination. She listened without interruption as I laid out everything: the siphoned funds, the affair, the stolen designs, and the conspiracy to take my house. When I finished, she folded her hands. "This is corporate fraud," she said simply. "And theft of intellectual property. You have more than enough to take them to court." Her calm steadiness steadied me, too. "What about the house?" I asked quietly. "Evelyn Monroe's will is airtight," she replied. "They can't touch it." For the first time in days, I breathed. But the relief didn't last. That evening, I opened my phone and felt the world collapse again. Bianca had posted a thread on social media. Dozens of photos, some from our childhood, others from the studio, captioned with lies. My sister, Lila Monroe, abandoned her family and refused to support her niece. She built her business by stealing our mother's designs. The post exploded overnight. Thousands of strangers who didn't know a thing about me commented like they did. Words like selfish, fraud, monster filled my notifications. Camilla shared the post, adding, "Family always comes first, even when some forget that." Even my father, my silent, cowardly father, reposted it with a simple line, "She's turned her back on us." My chest tightened as I scrolled. It was all coordinated, a smear campaign designed to break me before court could clear me. I called Jade. My voice shook as I said, "They're trying to destroy me online." Her tone was steady. "Then show them who you are. Don't stoop to their level, build higher." But that night, I couldn't build anything. I sat on the floor of my studio surrounded by sketches, tears falling silently on the fabric samples my mother once touched. I felt like I was losing her all over again. Then, a soft knock on my door. It was Tessa, our accountant, holding her laptop. "Lila," she said, eyes wide. "You need to see this." She showed me new transactions, fresh transfers to the same BW Collective account. Evan was still moving money, even after I'd locked him out of most systems. He was clever, rerouting through an old vendor account. "He's trying to drain you before court," Tessa said. That was it. The last line. I stood, wiping my tears. "Then we drain them first." The next day, I gathered my team, the few who had stood by me from the start, Jade, Tessa, Derek, and the seamstresses who kept Monroe Atelier alive. The shop felt tense, air thick with quiet loyalty. "Evan and Bianca are no longer part of this company," I announced. Gasps rippled through the room. "They've been stealing from us. And from now on, we fight back." Derek handed me printed letters, official termination notices. I signed each one, sealing the decision that would change everything. An hour later, Evan stormed into the studio, his face red with fury. "You can't fire me," he shouted, slamming his hand on my desk. "You'll regret this, Lila." I met his gaze, unflinching. "The only thing I regret," I said evenly, "is ever trusting you." Behind him, Bianca stood frozen, no longer smug, just pale. "You're pathetic," she spat. "You'll lose everything." "Not everything," I said softly. "Just you." They left, slamming the glass door so hard it rattled the walls. The studio fell silent. Then, Jade stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did what needed to be done," she whispered. I nodded, but inside, my resolve hardened into steel. They thought they could ruin me. But they had no idea who they were dealing with anymore. Within days, Heidi filed injunctions against Evan and Bianca, freezing their accounts and preparing fraud charges. But the public storm raged louder. Bianca kept posting, spinning new lies about me, claiming I'd stolen company money, that I'd forced Evan out unfairly. The more they lied, the louder the noise grew. And yet, so did something else. Support. Clients and customers who'd bought Monroe Atelier designs began posting their own stories, photos of wedding gowns, handmade dresses, memories tied to my work. This brand changed my confidence. Sustainable fashion built with integrity. The tide was turning. Still, Camilla wasn't done. She went live on social media one night, sitting in my mother's old living room, my living room, claiming I'd evicted them. "We have nowhere to go," she said, fake tears glistening. Every word was poison wrapped in pity. The next morning, I drove to the house. Camilla opened the door, that same smug look plastered on her face. Come to apologize? She asked. No, I said, stepping inside. I came to remind you whose house this is. Bianca appeared on the stairs, phone in hand, recording. Go ahead, she sneered. Give the world another show. I looked her in the eye. You already gave them one. I'm just finishing it. Then I turned and left, my pulse steady for the first time in weeks. The court date was set. Evan, Bianca, and my family were ready to destroy me with lies, but I had something stronger. Proof. And when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't just clear my name, it would end theirs. The day of the trial arrived cloaked in rain. Portland's courthouse loomed gray and cold, its steps slick with drizzle. I stood outside for a moment, watching the mist curl around the city like a breath before a storm. Beside me, Heidi Lane, my attorney, adjusted her coat and gave me a steady nod. You ready, Lila? As I'll ever be, I said. My voice didn't shake this time. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with a quiet tension that hummed beneath the marble walls. Cameras weren't allowed, but reporters still hovered outside, waiting for the verdict that had captured the city's attention. The designer versus her family. Across the room, Evan Brooks, Bianca Walsh, and Camilla Monroe sat beside their lawyer. My father, Richard, was there too, silent as always, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the floor. They looked smaller somehow, like a play cast waiting for their final act. Heidi placed a folder in front of me, thick with printed emails, bank records, and the will my mother had signed decades ago. My name, Lila Evelyn Monroe, printed in black ink across every page. This is your truth, Heidi whispered. Let's show them. The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, called the session to order. Your Honor, Heidi began, her tone calm but cutting. We are here to prove that the defendants, Mr. Brooks, Ms. Walsh, and Mrs. Monroe, conspired to defraud my client, Lila Monroe, by siphoning funds from her company, Monroe Atelier, and attempting to claim ownership of her inherited home. Across the aisle, Bianca rolled her eyes. Evan whispered something to her, his jaw tight. Heidi opened the first exhibit, the printed emails Derek had uncovered. The judge read silently, her brows knitting together. We'll take her brand and her house. Once we launch BW Collective, she's done. Keep her distracted with family drama. She'll never see it coming. Every word felt like reopening a wound, but this time, I didn't flinch. Then came the financial records. Transfers approved under Evan's name, accounts linked to Bianca. Each transaction traced back to BW Collective. Mr. Brooks, the judge said, her voice firm, how do you explain these payments? Evan shifted in his seat. They were business expenses, he said quickly. Consulting fees. Heidi raised an eyebrow. Consulting with your mistress? The courtroom gasped. Bianca's face flushed crimson. That's irrelevant, their lawyer barked. The emails make it very relevant, Heidi shot back. The judge motioned for silence. Continue, Ms. Lane. Heidi handed over the next file, correspondence between Bianca and Camilla. Once Lila's overwhelmed, we can file for occupancy. The house will be ours. Keep her off balance. Push her until she breaks. Camilla shifted uncomfortably. Her lips parted as if to speak, but the judge silenced her with a look. Heidi turned to me. Miss Monroe, would you like to address the court? I stood, my palms damp, heart pounding. Your Honor, I said quietly, I spent my life trying to hold this family together. I let them live in my mother's house, rent-free, because I believed love could fix what greed had broken. I looked at each of them in turn. They stole from my company. They lied to the world. They tried to take the one piece of my mother I had left. But they can't take her legacy, because it's in me. Silence filled the courtroom. Even Bianca looked away. Heidi resumed. Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself. The defense scrambled, throwing excuses like broken glass, claiming emotional stress, confusion, shared ownership. But it all fell apart when Heidi played one last piece of evidence, a recorded phone call between Camilla and Bianca. Camilla's voice, just push her harder, sweetheart. Once she snaps, the court will side with us. The judge's expression hardened. There was no coming back from that. After a long pause, she finally spoke. The evidence of fraud and conspiracy is overwhelming. Monroe Atelier and the Monroe estate remain the sole property of Ms. Lila Monroe. All claims by the defendants are dismissed. A collective murmur swept through the room. My knees nearly buckled with relief. Heidi's hand found mine under the table, firm, steady. The judge continued, her tone colder now. As for the defendants, this court recommends further investigation for embezzlement and defamation. Evan's face drained of color. Bianca stared at the floor, hands trembling. Camilla's composure cracked completely. And my father, he just looked broken, like a man realizing too late what silence costs. Outside, the rain had stopped. Reporters clustered around, microphones flashing. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Jade met me on the courthouse steps, her smile gentle but proud. You did it, she said softly. No, I replied, voice thick with emotion. We did. The community that had doubted me was now cheering for me. Orders for Monroe Atelier doubled that week. Messages flooded in, women thanking me for standing my ground, for not letting betrayal win. Inside the house that night, everything felt different. The air was lighter. The silence no longer hurt. My mother's sketches hung where they belonged, untouched, untainted. The war was over. But victory has its own kind of weight, one that sits quietly in your chest when the noise fades. I'd won everything back. And yet, part of me still mourned what I'd lost, not the company, not the house, but the family I had once begged to love me. I thought the story ended there, with justice. But I was wrong. Because sometimes, even after the truth sets you free, life tests whether you're ready to rebuild. And my next choice would change everything again. The courthouse victory should have felt like an ending, but real life doesn't fade to black that easily. After the judgment, reporters stopped calling, the headlines moved on, and I was left with silence, dense, unfamiliar silence that filled every room of my mother's house. For weeks I woke to the sound of rain tapping the windows, half expecting the past to knock at the door again. It never did. Camilla, Bianca, and Evan vanished into their own consequences. Investigations opened. Their accounts were frozen, their reputation in ruins. Even my father retreated somewhere out of state, leaving no forwarding address. But peace wasn't as simple as their absence. The house was too quiet. Every floorboard carried ghosts. One afternoon, Heidi Lane came by with a thick envelope. You might want to read this, she said gently. Inside were documents from Child Services. Bianca, awaiting sentencing, had a daughter. A little girl named Aria. Her father, Evan, was already facing charges and couldn't take custody. Heidi studied me for a long moment. They're asking if you'll assume guardianship, she said. You're the only stable relative left. The words hit harder than I expected. Bianca's child. The living reminder of every betrayal that nearly destroyed me. That night I sat at my mother's old sewing table, the locket she'd given me warm against my palm. I pictured the little girl, innocent, unknowing, and heard my mother's voice from memory. Love what's good in people, even when they can't see it in themselves. By morning, my decision was made. The adoption paperwork was quiet compared to the battles I'd fought. No headlines, no courtrooms, just signatures and a quiet oath to break a cycle. I turned one of the upstairs rooms into a nursery, soft gray walls, shelves of picture books, a tiny crib under the window. I called it Hope's Corner. When Arya arrived, wrapped in a faded pink blanket, she didn't cry. She just looked up at me with steady brown eyes, Bianca's eyes, but softer, searching. "Welcome home," I whispered, my throat tight. Jade came by the next day with an armful of toys. "You really did it," she said, smiling through tears. "You built something bigger than revenge." Maybe that was true. Because slowly, the house changed. Where betrayal once echoed, laughter began to bloom. At Monroe Atelier, the energy felt different too. The team, Tessa, Derek, the seamstresses, had stayed through every storm. Together, we expanded the line, recycled silks, plant-dyed fabrics, minimalist silhouettes. We launched a new campaign called Stitched from Strength. Orders poured in from across the country. Clients wrote messages like, "Your story inspired me to start over." Each word reminded me that healing can become its own kind of legacy. To honor that, I started the Evelyn Fund, a program offering grants and mentorship for women rebuilding their lives after betrayal, loss, or hardship. Jade helped me organize the first event, a small gathering in the studio surrounded by rolls of fabric and soft light. I stood at the front, Arya asleep in a carrier against my chest, and spoke from the heart. "My mother taught me that creation is courage," I told the crowd. "This fund is for every woman who was told she couldn't start again." The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was warm, human, full of understanding. Evenings became sacred, closing the shop, driving home under a pink sky, the city lights reflecting off wet streets. At home, Arya would babble as I cooked, her tiny hands reaching for measuring spoons and fabric scraps. The quiet wasn't empty anymore, it was peaceful. Sometimes, when she slept, I'd sit in the living room surrounded by my mother's sketches. I'd trace the lines with my fingers and whisper thank you, to her, to Jade, to Heidi, even to the pain that forced me to grow. Because in losing everything, I'd found the truest version of myself. Months later, the legal updates came. Evan pled guilty to embezzlement. Bianca accepted a plea deal for fraud and would serve time under supervision. Camilla's name disappeared from the headlines altogether. My father never resurfaced. Heidi called to share the news, her tone careful. "It's over," she said. "Not over," I replied. "Just quiet." After the call, I walked outside with Arya bundled in my arms. The yard was blooming with late spring lilies, flowers my mother had planted decades ago. Their scent filled the cool air, gentle and forgiving. "You'll never know the lies that built this garden," I murmured to Arya. "Only the love that rebuilt it." Time moved differently after that. Morning lights spilled across bolts of fabric, new interns joined Monroe Atelier, and the shop windows glowed each evening with soft amber light. Customers often asked about the house behind the brand, about the woman who turned pain into purpose. I never told them everything. Some stories are meant to live between stitches, not headlines. I thought peace was the end of my story, but sometimes peace is just another beginning. Because when the past tries to return, as it always does, you learn that forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing to keep building anyway. Years passed. Seasons slipped through the city like threads weaving a new tapestry. Portland changed, and so did I. The house that once held bitterness had grown warm again, soft laughter echoing through rooms that used to know only tension. The walls, once silent witnesses to deceit, now carried the hum of life. Wind chimes at the porch sang with every breeze, and from the nursery upstairs came the voice of a little girl who'd learned that home could be safe. Arya was 5 now, bright-eyed, fearless, with a creative spark that reminded me of my mother. She loved colors the way Evelyn did. Some mornings, she'd sit at the old sewing table, arranging scraps of fabric into tiny rainbows. "Look, Mama," she'd say proudly. I made a dress for the wind. And somehow, that small phrase captured everything I'd fought for, the freedom to dream again, unshackled by the past. Monroe Atelier had become more than a fashion label. It was a story, a movement. We'd grown beyond Oregon, collaborating with women-led workshops from across the country. Every design was created by survivors, single mothers, dreamers who had rebuilt their lives stitch by stitch. We weren't just making clothes. We were sewing strength. Each collection carried a message. Resilience, inheritance, light after. The pieces sold out not just because of beauty, but because each one carried a story written in thread and forgiveness. The Evelyn Fund, now a full foundation, provided grants for women to start small businesses in art, design, and sustainable crafts. We held annual showcases where recipients displayed their work, standing tall in the glow of their own triumphs. At the last event, I stood on stage beneath soft golden lights. The crowd was larger than ever, local leaders, journalists, community members, and women who'd once come to us for guidance now standing as mentors themselves. I took a deep breath, scanning the sea of faces, and began. Years ago, I thought success was survival. That if I just held everything together, I'd win. But true success isn't holding on, it's knowing when to let go. We can't rewrite the past, but we can re-stitch it into something beautiful. Applause filled the hall. Jade stood in the front row, tears shining in her eyes. Tessa and Derek managed the event booth, proud smiles on their faces. Heidi, my steadfast lawyer and friend, stood off to the side, her posture as strong as the first day I'd met her. These were my people now, my chosen family. After the ceremony, as the crowd thinned, a woman approached me, older, quiet, with hands that trembled slightly. She hesitated before speaking. "You don't remember me," she said softly, "but I was one of your mother's clients, years ago. Evelyn designed my wedding dress." Emotion caught in my throat. "You knew her?" "She spoke about you all the time," the woman said. "Said you'd have her fire someday." She smiled faintly. Looks like she was right. I walked her to the door, the city lights glimmering through the glass, and for the first time in years, I felt my mother's presence not as a memory, but as something alive. That night, after tucking Arya into bed, I sat in my mother's studio, the same room where my childhood had begun and ended too early. On the desk lay one of her old sketchbooks, its pages yellowed but still vibrant with pencil lines that never faded. I turned a page and found a dress design I'd never noticed before, a simple silhouette, but the notes written beside it stopped me cold. For her future, whatever she chooses to become. It was dated the year before she passed away. I ran my fingers over the faded ink, tears welling as I whispered, "You gave me everything, didn't you?" Outside, the rain began again, tapping against the window in a rhythm that felt familiar, like a lullaby from another life. The next morning, Arya came downstairs holding a crayon drawing of a storefront. "It's us," she said proudly. "You're sewing, and I'm helping." I smiled, heart full. "That's perfect, sweetheart." "Can I name it?" she asked. "Of course." She paused, thinking hard, then grinned. "Tomorrow's Thread." The name hung in the air like sunlight through glass, simple, hopeful, pure. And just like that, I knew our next chapter had already begun. Months later, the new campaign launched under Arya's title, Tomorrow's Thread, a future woven by women. It featured portraits of designers, mothers, survivors, each one radiant, each one proof that no betrayal could erase creation. Our message spread across platforms, drawing international recognition. Not fame, not noise, just quiet, powerful respect. On a calm summer evening, I stood outside the house as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in lavender hues. Arya ran through the garden, chasing butterflies, her laughter mixing with the rustle of leaves. I looked at the porch, where Camilla once sneered, where Evan once lied, where I once cried, and felt nothing but gratitude. Because even from pain, beauty can bloom. I turned toward the door, whispering a final thought to the air, to my mother, to the woman I used to be. Thank you for the scars. They taught me how to make something worth keeping. Then I went inside, the soft sound of Aria's laughter following me. And the house, my mother's house, finally felt like home. Every stitch, every scar, every silence had led me here. And if my story means anything at all, let it be this. You can lose everything and still build something beautiful from the pieces.